Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this IDSA live session, Data Spaces Dialogue, Design Principles for European Data Spaces. IDSA is very happy that you joined us today. And this session is co-organized by the EU project OpenDI. And we are also very happy that this project OpenDI supports us in talking about data spaces. These sequel of live sessions, the so-called Data Spaces Dialogue, which we start today, should make clear that the ongoing discussion on data spaces is a very important one because it's very much linked to the European data strategy. And it should also start from the IDS approach and showing and discussing what have been achieved so far. A lot of relevant results are already there to build future data ecosystems and the European data spaces like they are proposed by the European Commission. My name is Thorsten Hülsmann. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of International Data Spaces Association, and I'm very happy that I have today two very renowned discussants with me. First of all, it is Dr. Reinhold Achatz. He is the former CTO of thyssenkrupp and today the General Manager thyssenkrupp Transrapid GmbH. Welcome, Reinhold, and we are very happy that you join us for this coming hour.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me.
Second, I welcome my dear colleague Lars Nagel, who's the CEO of International Data Spaces Association. And within the next hour, we will discuss the topic of data spaces and will exclusively focus on design principles for European data spaces. The agenda foresees that we have two inputs, one by Reinhold, roughly 10 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, and the second one by Lars. The first one making clear why data sovereignty and trust in data ecosystems is important. And the second by Lars, well, starting to discuss and explain the achievements which are there already within the IDS approach. Afterwards, we have 25 to 30 minutes of a dialogue to deepen the topics which have been given by the inputs. I also want to state already now that this Data Spaces Dialogue is a sequel, and we already have two other dates planned after the summer break. I will come to this at the end of this session. Okay, so with this short introduction, I want to hand over to Reinhold Achatz. Reinhold, please share with us your initial input when it comes to design principles for European data spaces and data sovereignty in particular.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thorsten, for the introduction and specifically for inviting me to this Data Spaces Dialogue and specifically to the first session on design principles for European data spaces. I think it's very important that everybody understands that we need a very clear and very comprehensive European strategy for data. Because obviously the world of data is on one hand becoming more and more important, but on the other hand, there are different philosophies in the world. So in America, obviously, data is everything for consuming data, no matter what. In China, data are basically used by the government for the better of the country, but it's very dominated by the rules of the government. While in Europe, we basically really feel that the individual should have a decision what happens to the data. But nevertheless, it's very important to use data and to have basically a data strategy to be able to shape Europe's digital future. And this basically one statement I want to use and quote the European Commission: the success of Europe's digital transformation over the next 5 years will depend on establishing effective frameworks to ensure trustworthy technologies, for example, for sharing data, and give businesses the confidence and the means to digitize. But digital transformation is not something which should happen because we want to be digital. Obviously, it's really about creating value. And there are some examples given by the European Commission. What do they understand under value for the individual? It's improve healthcare, it's create safer and cleaner transport systems, generate new products and services, reduce the cost of public services, or improve sustainability and energy efficiency. Those are just some examples. To basically make it easier to understand what they're talking about, the European Commission proposes new common European data spaces. And I think this is a really a very good idea, because we have to create a data ecosystem. And to make it easier for people to work in those ecosystems are grouped into industrial data or manufacturing data space, Green Deal data space, mobility data space, health data space, financial data space, energy data space, agriculture data space for public administration, and a skills data space. So this is a very good and very clear understanding by the European Commission that data have value. And this is basically, it's all about how can we use the value of data in an adequate way and according to the European standards and to a European ethical understanding. And the value of data is even growing, or the value is growing because obviously we have more and more means to use the data with mathematical algorithms, with methods of analytics and artificial intelligence. And so for this reason, obviously, we have a dramatic increase of value. And I give you some examples from the domain I'm from manufacturing. In the moment, a lot of activities are going on in data analytics and artificial intelligence to optimize production and processes and systems, and as well to design, to optimize the design of products and solutions, to give some examples. To increase the quality and output, to increase energy efficiency, to optimize logistics, to identify the relevant customer. There's something which is more and more important as well, because with digital technologies, we have much broader access to customers. And in all those activities, data play a major role, and those are just examples. Obviously, there's not a full description of the opportunities we're having. The conscious selection of data and the use of will basically optimize the results of artificial intelligence. And obviously, this is a very relevant aspect as well, because many people are talking about artificial intelligence, and the results cannot be understood very well, or it's hard to do an interpretation of the results. But the results of artificial intelligence are clearly defined on one hand by the algorithms you're using, but on the other hand, by the training data you're using and by the data you're using to make decisions. So data have a very strong impact on the results of artificial intelligence. And really to create those things in an adequate way, we need to have a good understanding what is a data ecosystem and what are the key requirements really to work in an adequate way in such a data ecosystem. In the real world, a big number of parties create data. I think this is something which is a fact which we cannot influence, but we can use it. But on one hand, there are data consumers, and basically they need access to data from different sources, really to even have a broader spectrum of data available, and for example, to give artificial intelligence a better chance to make an adequate and good decisions. But there are, on the other hand, there are data generators. And when we basically are talking in the consumer world, people, and everybody of us is a data generator, are giving away the data for free or for the services which are provided by social media, for example, or many other apps we are using. But in industrial business, obviously, this is not so easy. So there has to be an incentive which is provided to the data users to become a data provider. On the other hand, one organization can be a data provider as well as a data consumer at a time, because we are living and moving in a data ecosystem, as I describe it. And exactly this data ecosystem is my definition. There are many definitions out there, but my definition is there's an interplay between data providers and data consumers, and this exactly forms a data ecosystem. It's, from my point of view, to have a fair treatment of everybody. It's always important to create a win-win situation. The interaction in a healthy data ecosystem generates this win-win situation, and between data provider and data consumer. And this is basically really the lifeblood of a data ecosystem, that there is a balanced situation. To allow this balanced situation, obviously data sovereignty is highly relevant. So the data provider wants to define what a consumer is allowed to do with the data provided. Because obviously as data have value, and in many ways data are sensitive, it's not a good idea basically to allow everything happen with industrial data. I talked earlier about there's an incentive necessary for the data provider. To create this incentive, obviously, the best way is to have contracts between the data provider and the data consumer. But in a digital world, obviously, we cannot ask some legal colleagues to design a contract and then negotiate the contract, and then eventually we execute the contract. Those contracts have to be software readable, defined by software, and executed by software. So this is a very strong requirement. But on the other hand, when I basically work with contracts, when I work with partners, there is trust is extremely important, because in a digital world, we don't meet personally. We basically have to find ways to generate the trust, which is normally generated by a person-to-person interaction. So to avoid, for example, the risk of fraud, obviously the partners in an ecosystem need to be identifiable. But on the other hand, obviously as well, trust has to happen where data sovereignty helps, because obviously when I am able to define what my partner, my counterpart can do with the data, obviously I'm more willing and I feel more secure sharing data. Another very relevant topic is standardization, because today in many ways there are many ways of exchanging data, and for that reason obviously standardization will allow an easy access and will reduce the hurdle for sharing data. The standardization of syntax is a very old one, so since more than 20-30 years we are very good in standardizing syntax. Obviously it's always the question how many are using one standard, but the standardization in semantics, we are working on that for many years as well, but there are still ways to go. But obviously standardization of semantics, specifically when we talk about a data space, is highly relevant. We from International Data Spaces Association basically had the idea to offer a solution, and behind the International Data Spaces Association, it's not an anonymous association. It's basically more than 110 companies which are behind it, and thyssenkrupp is one of the founding members of the association. thyssenkrupp joined for a very simple reason, because thyssenkrupp is more data user and a data provider than a software organization. But for us, it's specifically important that we specifically are able to work in a sound and healthy data ecosystem, a trusted data ecosystem based on European values. In the meantime, a lot of very good definitions were made in the International Data Spaces Association, specifically by Fraunhofer, but as well supported by many other members, which really have a strong contribution to the International Data Spaces definitions. I think the key element of it is a connector. A connector will be integrated in every program, in any application, which either wants to share data or wants to acquire data. And basically a broker will allow to understand who is able to provide what kind of data. And obviously there is as well a function to check the identity. And there's an app store which basically allows us to have contracts stored or to have applications stored which are reusable. This is the basic architecture, and a lot of documents and a lot of information about this architecture and how to use the architecture is available today. To summarize, basically, it was our vision in IDS or in IDSA to create a de facto market standard for sovereign exchange of data, with the mission to form a basis for vendor-neutral distributed digital marketplace, which basically allows to work with data. And this marketplace supports the sharing of data without losing the ownership. On the other hand, to make it really available for everybody, we have to reduce complexity and the cost of data transfer, specifically standardization plays a major role here. And I think this is something which is an additional value, is really supporting the ethical values of Europe, like privacy and equal opportunity. So specifically for smaller and medium-sized companies and organizations and for individuals, I think it's very important that this is the case. But last but not least, I think IDS is a precondition for fair use of artificial intelligence, and I personally believe sharing data and artificial intelligence will dominate a lot of discussions we will have in the future. So this is my presentation. Thank you very much. And yeah, with this, I will hand over back to Thorsten.
Thank you, Reinhold, for this very interesting and very focused input. And I think we all understood, and it became very clear that there is a need from industry, on the one hand, to share data for the future of various activities, but also keeping data ownership, or as you call it, to provide data sovereignty. We will come to this in the discussion later on, but now I want to ask Lars Nagel to focus a little bit on these design principles for data spaces, which were mentioned by Reinhold. And from our ongoing work in various projects in the IDS launching coalition, but also within different research projects, the maturity of the different building blocks which are there can be explained by Lars, that all of you from the audience can maybe better understand what is the state of play and what are the real achievements IDS is bringing into place. So Lars, please go ahead and share with us your input.
Yeah, I'm really happy to do so. Good morning to everyone. I hope that everything is fine with sound and video. So,
okay, loud and clear.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I'm really happy that so many people are joining our live session today, and well, good to hear you later again when having our discussion. Yeah, well, I would like to focus a little bit on the design principles for data spaces and what can be reused when setting up data spaces. So be it a domain-driven initiative, be it a company-driven initiative, be it a research project, or be it a whole data space as proposed by the European Commission. So our idea is that all these endeavors should be done in the same manner to really leverage effects by using the same design principles. And there's a lot of things that can be reused. Well, I would like to start a little bit about explaining why we do need data spaces and why this is a very, very good idea and why this is a different approach than other ideas of sharing or exchanging data. Well, the first thing to state, and the first and the core precondition when it comes to data economy is that we do have really valuable assets at our hands. So data is an economic asset. And this means that there are a lot of data treasures hidden in the companies, in ecosystems, in domains. And these treasures can be really enlarged and leveraged by sharing data. So we have to to acknowledge that data is an economic asset. So having this as a precondition, I have to change here. Having this as a precondition, we have to think about how data is moving in these data spaces and what does this mean. So Reinhold already mentioned it. We need a community of trust for data sharing. So okay, but what does this really mean and what do we have to do? Well, in the first we have to state that data spaces is really a new paradigm. So it's something different than storing and processing data in one central cloud instance and one central cloud solution. When we're talking about data spaces, this is really new. This is a federated data architecture. We know that a data set can coexist at several places in this data space. And we do have the concept of, data moving around, so data visiting and data creating data networks. So that is the core definition of data spaces. So data is moving in those data spaces, well, like a kid should move in the world. So this is what it's supposed to be and what it's all about in data spaces. And well, having again the comparison with a kid or with a child, this should be conducted independently, self-assured, and resilient. So if you have a child, and well, that is probably the greatest value in your life, then you really want to be sure that if it leaves your house, if it goes on the street, if it goes to school, that it may move independently on the one hand side, but you have to make sure that it is self-assured and that it is resilient to any influence from out there, so that it knows that it is secure in the outside world. And it is the same thing with data and data spaces. So we have to create data spaces so that data can move around like this with good conscience. So that is the most important thing, because data is of very high value. That is the precondition for data spaces. Okay, so then we have to talk about data spaces. So we have to create them. So we have to make sure that we create a world where our children can move around, and we can be sure with very good conscience that we absolutely know what is happening there. Therefore, we need data spaces, and let's use the analogy of data spaces as a clean room for data economy. So a clean room, well, it's a room, it's a clean room where a lot of very important things may happen. And imagine a clean room. So everyone is invited to join. So you know where the door is, you can move in, but we have to make very clear that these doors are secure, that we know who gets in, who gets out, what gets in, what gets out. And we have to explain what happens in these data spaces. So what are the clear rules, how to move these data sets around, how to combine data, and how to manipulate data. So we have to come up with these very, very clear rules. And that is what it's about with IDS and data spaces. So you can see here, there's an outside world. You can share data the normal way, via email, via HTTP protocol, through the internet, or you can decide that your data set is of high value, and then you can put them in data spaces where you know that there's a bit more control. And we can define this, and therefore we have to set up a certain infrastructure following, well, some design principles that make sure that, well, the children may move around as we want them to do in a very self-assured, independent manner. And what you can see here is there's an untrusted world and there's a trusted world, and you can access this world, so this clean room, via the door, which is called the IDS connector. And then there are several services which provide trust in this ecosystem. You can see them here marked in magenta colored. So certification is one issue, and digital certificates and other things. I don't want to go into detail, but the doors, these are the important things for data spaces, and these are the IDS connector architecture. And that is what I would like to emphasize here. We know that data sharing is different in different usage scenarios. So we know that there's not one size fits all approach. So we came up with 4 security profiles. So depending on your need for security, so either from quick data sharing to really comprehensive security requirements. These profiles are defined, and the architecture is even formulated in a formal standard, a DIN 27070 specification. It is called Security Gateway for Sharing Data and Services, and it's more comprehensively described in our reference architecture model version 3. And then, well, studying these documents, you know how to create these doors to the clean rooms for data, to the data spaces. And those connectors can be implemented in a lot of different scenarios, from embedded systems over mobile devices up to client service solutions. This has already been done, and we can show reference implementations for this. And if you want to show the outside world, outside the data spaces, outside the clean room for data, that you are sticking to these rules, and that inside, after this door, everything is secure, then you can state it to the outside world by certification. So the IDS ready statement, our formal certification scheme. Let's have a look inside this connector. So how to build the door. So this is the architecture behind. So you can see this is a piece of software which runs on any hardware, on any virtual machine. It consists of containers. So for example, realized by Docker or Kubernetes or whatever. And then the data flows through this piece of software from the untrusted to the trusted side. And you can even attach or bring applications, apps into this connector, so that you can manipulate data already in the connector. And so there are scenarios out there where the data does not leave your company, it does not leave the connector, but only the result of the manipulation, of the processing with another app which has been inserted into this connector. Only the result leaves the connector, so the data set may stay forever at your hands. And then we have something we call remote execution. So this is also possible. So this is the technology behind. And well, this is the first step when really talking about data sovereignty and data spaces. And the connector empowers you to, well, create trust in the first. You see it in the middle part of this slide. So if you really want to create trust between different security domains, completely different IT systems, between completely different data endpoints, so between a sensor and an IoT cloud or an enterprise cloud, for example, then we have to talk about trust, and the connector makes sure that it's like this, and the certification assesses this. Then the connector may deliver even more, so it provides unlimited interoperability. So we have to understand which kind of data is provided at all the other doors in the data space, in the clean room. So we have to have an information model on a very high semantic level, so that you can understand, at least on metadata description, what kind of data set with which usage constraints is offered there. And this is the third part. So when talking about the governance and the rules in these data spaces, in the clean rooms, then we have to think about, okay, how to share data, how to combine data sets, how does it work? So, and then we have to talk about usage control. So attaching the contracts and the usage constraints to data. That is what Reinhold already mentioned. And therefore we have to empower systems to integrate the concept of usage control, so that you can not only attach rules and constraints to your data set, but that you can also enforce that it really happens on a technical base. And that is important, and that is realized by the IDS connector. The information model, just one sentence, this is an essential agreement. So if everyone describes the data like this, on a semantic level, not on a data format level, then we can facilitate compatibility and interoperability. And then going deeper down, we can implement any data format, any domain-specific vocabulary which is out there from the logistics domain, the asset administration shell from the manufacturing domain, or an HL7 standard from the health domain. One word on data usage control. So data usage control is more than only access control, but it also attaches obligations to data for the future usage. So what shall happen with your data? Who may have a look at it? Do someone has to pay or not? So when talking about data as an asset and data about the data economy, then we have to come up with something like that, because we have to talk about, well, how to pay for this economic asset. And today there's nothing in place for this. And so when really talking about data spaces as a part of the future economy of the European digital single market, then we have to start setting up infrastructures which really make data usage control possible. And then you can really very fine-grained define what happens with your data, and then it's not only he may have a look at it and she not, but then you can really come up with a lot of comprehensive scenario of data sharing. And well, to bring this together, this is a sheet that we would like to share via these data sharing dialogue sequel. We came up with these design principles for data spaces. This can be reused by any data space endeavor out there. And you can see here the three main value propositions we do have, and then the well, blue-gray boxes describe the things which can be reused. So in the center, you can see all the issues which are arranged and controlled and realized by the IDS connector. On the right-hand side, you can see all the issues on governance. So it's legal agreements, operational agreements, business-oriented models, and so on. And on the left-hand side, you can see all the issues on metadata, description, data standards, and formats. And I explained the information model on this. And my last comment here is, when talking about data spaces, the European data space and the European strategy for data, then we have to make sure that this top level, this generic level, is implemented in any data space endeavor. And then we really create interoperability between the data spaces, and then we enlarge the data pool for the future digital single market. And the top level, that is what is described in the IDS reference architecture. And then it points to more domain-specific and even business case or company-specific issues, which can be arranged on a lower level, but the data spaces are interoperable. And with this, we really create a large data space for Europe's economy, which is supposed to be the European data space. So data sharing is better than playing alone. I think we all share this insight, and I'm really looking forward to create data spaces with all of you. Thanks a lot for listening. I'm looking really forward to the discussion now.
Okay, Lars, thank you very much also to give us this precise overview about what could be the starting point for designing data spaces. I think this is very important for an understanding. As a starting point for our discussion, I want to pick up two questions which I received through the chat, but also bilaterally, because I think this is sometimes mixed. It's a very easy question, and Reinhold, I want to point this question to you. The people ask me, where can I buy IDS-related products, and is IDS Association itself offering any software connectors? Obviously not, but maybe you can answer to this question.
Definitely. I think it's from my point of view, the role of the IDS Association is really to define the standard and really to define the rules which we, Lars and I, try to explain. But our idea is really that we offer software companies and software providers the opportunity to do their own applications. So the idea is basically that our members, our partners offer applications based on a standard which is mutually defined. I think, and this is, from my point of view, a very relevant aspect, because through our standard building blocks we are offering, we really ensure the interoperability, even if software is coming from different vendors. So the software can cooperate without big testing, because obviously the testing is done while those companies are working in our testing environment, working in Plugfest, for example. So it's pre-tested software, but it's individually designed software by our partners and our users. On the other hand, our idea is basically to offer in the next step the key components as open source, so that everybody can look into it. So there's nothing to hide, and basically that everybody, again, it's a part of the trust discussion we had earlier. So from my point of view, those are the relevant aspects. We would like to give software companies an opportunity, but on the other hand, we want to ensure interoperability and trust.
Perfect. Thank you, Reinhold, for this clarification. Last, a second question. When we are talking about data spaces, you already mentioned standardization. Could you give an outlook how the starting point for standardization from the German Institute of Standardization, DIN, will look like in the future? Is it planned that there are any European or international activities?
Yes. Absolutely, and that is more than necessary. We learned that you have to start when going for standardization. You have to start in a country with defining the asset in itself, and then bringing it to higher standardization bodies. So we started with more than 50 companies in Germany, and those were not all members of IDSA, and we created in a process of 1.5 years the DIN specification, and there's a very clearly defined and forward path from DIN, from the German Institute, to ISO, and that is what we are currently going. So we are now bringing these specification to ISO bodies. And then we hope that that ISO will just take the DIN standard, approve it, perhaps modify it a bit, and then we have an ISO standard. In parallel, we are bringing bringing the standardization activity on the European level. So we are now also in touch with CN and the bodies on European level to make IDS concept, so the connector, but also other parts, other roles in our architecture, so like the broker, for example, to standardization bodies and endeavors, and yeah. So we hope that we will have a comprehensive standardization landscape of IDS concept and components in the very near future. And you're all invited to join us on this path, because standardization is always an open activity, and we definitely need your requirements and your insights on what we are doing, even if you are not too closely linked to us until now. So we want to come up with design principles for data spaces which work for the whole data economy. And well, data, it does not stop on borders, so it has to be international in the first.
Okay, thank you, Lars, for this clarification. Reinhold, you mentioned in your input that you're coming from manufacturing, so obviously you are quite familiar with a lot of things going on in manufacturing. Now, when we are talking about upscaling the IDS approach, people usually ask us, what is the relation to other initiatives, for instance, like the IIR or to the OPC Foundation? Could you maybe give us an insight why it is important to liaise with these kind of endeavors?
Yeah, thank you very much, Torsten. This is a very relevant question, because obviously we are not starting on a green field. So there's a long standing history of data exchange, specifically on the factory level. And as I talked earlier about the value of data, obviously the access to data is a key element we need, because so we really should work and are working very intensively with existing organizations which already are in the area of collecting data. And I specifically was initiating the OPC Foundation, I think now nearly 25 years ago, when we basically started the activity. We basically said we have to standardize the access to data. We didn't have in mind obviously artificial intelligence usage and so on, but in the meantime, this is all possible. So from my point of view, creating access to data and helping our partners to create access in a standardized way, in an interoperable way, this is a key element, and from my point of view is a precondition for a successful rollout of IDS. And obviously this is very well understood by the organization, and is as well understood as well by our partners. So I think we have very good relationships to a number of organizations, and this is really a value which is created, and this is very well understood on both sides.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for this insight. Also on this, Lars, there's one question coming through the chat. What is the relation between the projects Federated and Phoenix, which we know from the logistics sector? And I think you just recently participated in the Digital Transport and Logistics Forum with an input, and maybe you can just give an answer or a comparison how these two projects are linked or related to IDS, or maybe not.
Well, I think any project which deals with data should be linked to us. So that's the first answer. Well, I know those projects quite well, and this is a perfect answer and a very good question. Perfect question and a very good question. So what we encounter in the logistics domain, for example, and this is a role model for all other domains, is that companies have obviously gained the insight that data sharing is necessary, and that they are that they want to share data, and they need obviously a platform for this. So this has happened in the last years, But this is, in most of the cases, not sufficient. So they see that they have to even get in touch with more companies, with more data endpoints to enlarge the pool of data. So it doesn't work with only one platform. So we have to talk about interoperability between platforms, between projects, between data spaces. So, and that is exactly the story I told. So Federated and Pending. So these are two projects. They are both in the logistics domain. Probably a lot of companies are involved in both projects or are interested in both projects. So we have to make them interoperable. So the quality of the solutions and the offerings based upon these platforms will increase a lot and will provide benefit to the whole logistics domain. And therefore, it is of utmost importance for the logistics domain to foster the interoperability of all these platform endeavors, like these two projects, but also others. And that is why there are so many platforms out there on European level, so DTLF and ETPLs and all of this. And what we really have to, and what these organizations or endeavors have to do is, out of all these platforms and all these sole projects, to form really a data space, a logistics data space. And this will be an important part of the European data space. And again, this data space must be interoperable with other data spaces to really let the digital single market prosper. And here, logistics is a very good example, because logistics is a cross-domain approach in itself, always, so forever. And so it always touches manufacturing, energy, mobility, public sector, all of this. So when talking about the European data space, I think, for example, logistics is a very, very focal activity when talking about interoperability and common design principles for data spaces.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for this detailed explanation. I want to come to another part of the discussion and want to talk about the maturity. I think, Lars, from your presentation, you gave us this overview of the building blocks and the three layers on a generic part, and then on a domain or industry part, and on a business or use case level. Exactly this one. Maybe, I don't know who will start to answer this question, but what is, from your point of view, the maturity concerning these different building blocks? Could you share with us some insight on this?
Shall I start? Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, we're having a look at these gray-blue boxes in the spreadsheet. Probably you immediately see that there are different maturity levels already there. So let's start from my perspective, at the left-hand side. So data standards and data formats. So, well, that is more or less done. So we see this is domain specific. And in most of the domains, there's one focal standard or several focal standards for describing data. So we have the work of OPC, we have HL7 in the health domain, and others. And so the maturity grade is like between 95% and 100% perhaps. So metadata description in general and all the concepts of linked data, well, we all know this, and ODRL or W3C, they are working on this issue. So metadata is, well, it's known, but it's not really diffused into every domain, into every data usage scenario. So I would assess that the maturity level is like, well, when it comes to implementation, to reality, not to the concept, to like a 70%. Talking about data exchange, so we're talking about transport protocols and so on. So we're talking about, well, rather data sessions than end-to-end protocols, so like MQTT and the likes. So that is also well done. Then talking about the middle part, trust, identification and authentication. This is also, well, like it should be done. So it's perhaps not implemented everywhere, but we have, for example, very concrete building blocks on European level with IDSA. Well, we just have to make sure, and that is why it's on the top level, on the generic level. So my wish, for example, and my plea to the Commission would be to well, explain a little bit, or to clarify that when it comes to digital certificates, for example, EIDAS will really be the industry standard, so that we have absolutely unique digital identity for any company and every device, for every sensor, for every IoT device which is out there, so that it can be uniquely defined. So this is important. So then we can really have data spaces which are combined. Well, certification, monitoring, authorization, there are a lot of concepts, and especially a lot of domain-specific endeavors out there. So, for example, a lot of trust schemes like iShare, with which we are collaborating a lot. It is important. So the maturity level is quite high. It has to be implemented in more domains. So they, for example, start in the logistics domain. What is really to be done is to talk about the governance for the data economy, and I think this is the real challenge of the data strategy for the Commission and for all of us, to really come up with a very clear and on common sense based agreed governance for the data economy, so that any company approaching or stepping into a data space knows what rules are behind the door, so that I'm really in good conscience that I know what happens with my data. I know the legal agreements. So we need smart contracts, so like building blocks which are really machine readable. We need operational agreements so that I know how to connect with a broker, how to retrieve a trusted app from an app store, how to retrieve a vocabulary from a domain I do not know, and so on. So that has to be specified, and there the maturity level is probably not more than 50%, and that is what we have to really focus on in realizing the European strategy for data, and in our joint work in the next month and probably years.
Thank you, Lars.
Maybe
does your evaluation fit?
Yeah, I think I can agree with everything what Lars said, but Lars is coming basically from the IDSA, from the organization side, while I'm coming from a user company. So basically, we implemented already a lot of use cases, and people with coming from a use case or user side always say only what I see is available, what I see in my project basically. And so from my point of view, the key element we were using so far in thyssenkrupp in this case is interoperability. So really, this is something which is well implemented, and we have a number of use cases where we really demonstrate it works. But when we come to trust and governance, our use cases are in the moment limited to a limited group of partners. So basically, when you know each other already, because you did a project together, obviously the trust mechanisms which are implemented in IDS are not so relevant for our first use cases, but they will be in future. And the same is true for governance of the data economy. So I think for today's implemented use cases, which by the way started implementation in some cases already years ago, interoperability is the key element. But we're looking forward to in a more open environment to use trust and to use the mechanisms of governance which are available and which are defined. But I don't see too many use cases, at least not from thyssenkrupp, where we used it so far. But this is this investment in the future, which is highly appreciated and really needed for an open system as we have it in mind, specifically when we look at the definitions of the European Commission, where they defined the data spaces. As soon as I'm there, where really the data spaces are there, obviously Interoperability will always a precondition for everything, but trust and governance in an open data space are very necessary, and we are on our way to go there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Reinhold, for this clarification. So now we have a little bit of challenge because we only have some 4 or 5 minutes left, and we have a bunch of questions in the chat, but I think part of them are already answered by your statements. I just want to pick out one more, which is basically asking how can we make sure the interoperability between existing activities and the IDS connector. So I think this is coming from both statements from both of you. Lars, do you want to answer to this question maybe?
Yeah, so this is probably not a big challenge because we have not been inventing the wheel completely new. So we have been working upon existing technology. So what I presented as the IDS connector, well, we can call it a secure IoT gateway. Well, there are a lot of secure IoT gateways out there. And when comparing it to our reference architecture, you probably have already gone more than 80% of the way. So you are using the same container technology, you are using the same transport protocols, you are probably using metadata models and so on. And therefore, it will be very easy to make an existing connector or gateway or piece of software, an IDS connector. And then, as explained, we have 4 different security profiles. So it is also easy to start with the lower version, with the version number 1. The base connector, and then implement more and more comprehensive security functionalities and governance functionalities like usage control. And that is what we encountered and learned from the projects of our members and of the companies out there. That well, some companies even said, well, we do have an IDS connector at our hands. We do not call it like this. Let's check if it is one. And so that is probably the answer.
Okay, I think Lars, you showed us the perfect slide earlier, where you basically showed the connection between the trusted world and the outside world, and this is basically how it all. That is something from a pragmatic point of view, which always works.
Thank you, Reinhold, for this clarification as well. Okay, so at the end, I just want to come up with one more question. Maybe, Reinhold, the first one to you, or maybe it's the same question with 2 answers, one from Lars and one from Reinhold. Reinhold, when we are thinking about the building blocks in order to build data spaces, what is needed from your point of view to really, make this happen, what we have now discussed as a future challenge, trust and governance?
I think on one hand, the definitions and the building blocks are there. So this is something we can work today. And this is, from my point of view, a very important element, and for a user company, always the first very important step. But on the other hand, we're living in a world which is not standing still. It's exactly the opposite. The world is changing around us, is changing dramatically. For that reason, I think the IDS Association has a clear understanding that we work on one hand closely together with European research organizations and with a number of other research organizations, really to develop standards even further and to integrate always the latest technology in our standard. So from my point of view, to make the long story short, there are existing modules which we can use, but the development is ongoing, and the association, the International Data Spaces Association, will make sure that we can take all our users with us into the future as well, into future standards.
Thank you, Reinhold, for this. Lars, same question for you. What, from your opinion, is needed? Maybe something to add? Unmuting
is needed. Well, in the first. Yeah, well, I think I explained what is needed in my statements. We really have now to make the European data space and all the mentioned data spaces really work. We have to make sure that we identify some common design principles for these data spaces. So we are in touch with a lot of projects out there on European level, and we encounter that at the end, it is probably all very well, designed in the same manner as we are proposing from IDS and as I demonstrated. And I think it's really a small step to go, and this is so really trying out things and bringing this cross-domain inter-data space interoperability. We have to focus on this, and I would like to see a lot of like moderating measures from the Commission and a lot of projects where really the goal is take two data spaces and bring them together, and then we can learn and make this really happen.